researcher at Slipstream and working on the Comet Electric Homes new construction offering. Today's program was put by the Illinois Green Alliance Programs Committee, a volunteer group that coordinates the educational events covering the wide range of topics throughout the year for the green building industry. The team that put on today's event consists of Wayne Beals and myself. Quick background of Illinois Green Alliance. Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. The 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet and get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through the educational events such as the panels and building tours, like this one today, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and also by advocating for new policies and legislation. I want to take a moment to recognize Illinois Green Alliance sustainable sponsors who make our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, Research Renovations, and so on. Make a commitment to advancing green buildings and industry communities across the state and start the conversation to sponsor this partnership today by visiting the website. We have a great lineup of speakers for today's webinar and very packed with resourceful content. We will start with Farbman, Sustainability Consultant and High Performance Project Manager at dbHMS. He serves on the Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council as an energy efficiency advocate with technical expertise in residential buildings. He will talk about the trends of the current market, including IRA and CEJA, and diverse and great options for electric homes. So starting off the webinar nicely. Second speaker today is Wayne Beals. He is a sustainable realtor and development consultant, and he is an exclusive marketing broker for award-winning sustainable home builder, Greenline Homes. He has recently renovated his own home to all electric and will share some of his experiences as sustainable realtor and a homeowner. Next, the guru of the Chicago Energy Transformation Code today. Grant Urquhart is Managing Deputy Commissioner of the City of Chicago Department of Buildings with responsibilities for code development, policy, and administration. Next, we have Benjamin Van Horn. He is the founder of Greenline Homes, responsible for the development of affordable and sustainable green homes in Chicago neighborhoods. He built the all-electric homes for the home tour happening this afternoon, so ask a lot of questions to him. And I'm Sophia Soul, a researcher at Slipstream, working on the ComEd Electric Homes program that funded the development of the Greenline Homes at 4151 South Ferrari Avenue, so where we have the home tour happening this afternoon. I will now hand it off to Scott, and please take it away.
Thanks, Sophia. Nice to meet you all or see you all virtually. So Sophia did a very nice introduction for myself. I am with dbHMS. We're a research-driven studio within dbHMS, an MEP design firm, and also Illinois Green sponsor. So thank you for having me today. I've trained as an architect, but now working in the engineering, energy consulting world, and have a special passion for passive house building. And it's kind of sent me down this path of high performance and decarbonization and getting involved in code council work as well. So just to quickly show on the screen, this is a little bit, a couple of years old, but this kind of sets the stage for why we're talking about the things we're talking today. The IPCC has evaluated global greenhouse gas emissions and have run a number of scenarios. And really the only way to keep warming below the recommended threshold is to start designing and building towards a zero carbon future. We can cut emissions, try and do that, but it doesn't quite really get us to where we need to go. So in order to be zero carbon, one of the first things to do from a design perspective is to plan for all electric or electrify our built environment. So if we go to the next slide, To go a little more granular with the data, where exactly is carbon and greenhouse gas emissions coming from in what we're talking about? So the slice up there in blue, 18% buildings operations, that's really the core slice that we're going to be talking about today. And 11% of that is residential operational energy use. So the utility bills that you pay on an annual basis contribute to that 11% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world. That's a pretty big slice of the pie, much larger than some of the other slices. So it's why we're starting to focus efforts on all this content that we're going to be talking about today. And as we move forward, so I'm not a policy and incentive expert. If we go to the next slide. But just want to quickly touch on what's happening at the federal level with the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of money coming that can help support the transition to all electric and energy efficient homes and buildings. A lot of what we've heard of, kind of to date is revolving around the existing homes realm. So Wayne, if he did his, retrofit, or I'm in the process of retrofitting our home as well, we're tapping into that bucket of money. But there's also a bucket of money that's going to be coming to help support new construction as well. And I think that the details are to be hashed out. Also, it's that fifth bullet point, I think the 30 billion in flexible greenhouse gas reduction spending for states and cities. So it's, TBD how Illinois and other states and Chicago and other cities will be able to tap into some of that money to help support new construction, electrification, decarbonization, and all that good and fun stuff. So there's also CEJA, Climate Equitable Jobs Act, which is a state legislation in the state of Illinois. And, the general premise is trying to push things towards a zero carbon electrical grid by 2045. So this is really the thing that's like the catalyst that's really accelerating what we're trying to do and what some of the other policies are trying to follow. If the grid is going to be a zero emissions grid, if we electrify all of our buildings in the built environment, then everything we do, that 18% operational blue slice of the pie is zero at that point. So if we can get clean, renewable energy and we could use that energy to power our buildings, every bit of our buildings, then we have a zero operational slice of the pie. And, we're not going to get into today, but then what's left over, we want to talk about building materials, embodied carbon, things like that. That's going to be the, the leftover piece about global emissions. So this is just going to be a quick overview of what the options are inside a typical home, and what the electric options are and what the fossil fuel options are. And you'll see that in most of these cases, if you do continue to decide to go with the fossil fuel option, there's a bit more work you need to do on top of that, and that it correlates to what Grant's going to be talking about with the Energy Transformation Code. So when we're talking about cooking, for electric, we have two options. We have our typical electric range, which uses electric resistance below the glass top. And then we also have our induction range, which has been getting a lot of attention recently, being a high performance cooking appliance. It relies on magnetism, and you're like just heating the surface of your cookware that touches the surface of the range, boils water at a highly efficient pace. And that's really where we see the market going, not only from an energy use perspective, but from a health and wellness perspective. It it does not emit indoor pollutants that could cause harm to you and in your family. So you can still use gas, but what does that mean? If you do, you have to also install the electrical capacity and infrastructure to change over to an electric cooking appliance at any time in the future. So if you do gas, you're doubling your infrastructure. You have to do your electrical infrastructure anyways. And what we're seeing is, this financially puts you towards electric because of that. Prior to maybe this past year, we could talk about what ventilation options are, good, better, best. But with the transformation code, there is a requirement of kitchen exhaust. So now it's just a matter of how much do you want to do, and how do you want to operate it. You could do it continuously. You could do it intermittently at the cooking source, or you could do a general kitchen exhaust where maybe it's just off to the side, and doing air changes in your kitchen area. Let's go to the next one, Sophia. I touched on this quickly. So if you do decide to go open combustion with your fuel source, here's just some of the things that happens and comes with it that you'll want to pay attention to, some of the indoor pollutants. And then after this, what are our recommendations from professional practice? We say, you can still do gas, that's okay, but let's make sure that your ventilation is really adequate and frankly, beyond adequate. It's got to be good. What's a better option? Electric cooking with an intermittent hood. So you can turn it on when you're cooking and you can turn it on when you're not. And what's the best option? We see a combination of induction, but then doing a general kitchen exhaust where you're continuously air changing the air within your kitchen space. And it's kind of a continuous approach that guarantees the highest level of indoor air quality. So dryer options, kind of the same thing here. We got two electric options. We have a normal electric dryer that could be ducted or ductless, or we now have heat pump dryers, which are definitely ductless and more efficient energy-wise. Or we have our traditional fossil fuel gas burning dryer, which does need a duct to, exhaust out that combustion air. Just like the range, if you do decide to install a gas-fired dryer, you also have to provide the electrical capacity and infrastructure to change over to an electric dryer in the future, which is a 30 amp dedicated circuit and breaker in the wiring and conduit as well. Hot water heating, again, very similar. We have our normal electric boiler, and now we have our heat pump hot water heaters, which there's a couple versions of this, but I think the most common version is this hybrid heat pump water heater, which has the heat pump on top of it. And you could switch between heat pump mode and electric mode, depending on how your indoor air temperatures are. And then we have our fossil fuel options, again, our traditional gas-fired boiler hot water heater, or our tankless option, which is the on-demand as well. And same thing, if you don't go with your electric appliance, you do have to plan, again, for future electrical capacity and infrastructure. Maybe the hardest one to wrap our brains around, from my opinion, is what do we do with heating and cooling? There's a lot of people out there who just haven't stayed up to date on the technology and the research and feel like you can't effectively do heating in Chicago with an electric piece of equipment. But things have changed substantially just over the past few years. There's cold climate specific heat pumps that do work down to -10. And there's a lot of options to do supplementary heat on top of that if there are extreme weather conditions. So from the electric side, we have maybe what you would be familiar with, the high wall ductless mini split, where you're just conditioning the room that it's in, or the space that fan coil unit is sitting in. There's also ducted versions. On the left there is kind of what we would look to be like a drop-in replacement for your furnace. It's a vertical air handling unit, but it's a heat pump, and you can kind of utilize your existing ductwork if you wanted to do that. Or you have some ducted heat pumps. So they're like that mini split on the wall up there, but they sit above your ceiling, and you can run ductwork just like you would typically. Gas option is what most people are familiar with, gas-fired furnace, with your split AC system. No requirements here on that yet. You are still able to put this in without any electrical infrastructure implications. But if you're doing it on everything else, from my perspective, why not do it here as well? So we can move on now to Wayne, who's going to take over and talk about some actual projects and real things. I'm just talking about the hypothetical design stuff. So Wayne, take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott. That's an awesome coverage of some of the systems that have been used in a lot of these all-electric homes. So, what I'm trying to cover today is just some practical application of all electric homes in neighborhoods in Chicago, just so you can see what's actually happening out there and maybe take some cues from that in your future designs if you're an architect or a builder or an engineer. This is a photo of a row of 8 homes that was constructed, the first one in 2016 and the last one last year. And they're, entirely renewably powered on the roof. We have all electric, no gas lines, and these homes are performing very well. This is in the Woodlawn community. Next slide, please. So when we talk about all electric homes, the energy transformation code kind of comes up, and I'll let Grant really talk more to that. But now it's required to really kind of prepare your homes to be all electric in the future. And if you're doing that, there's not a lot of incentive to still include gas just because it's an additional cost, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act. You have some incentives. There's ComEd has some incentives. So there's all this sort of available carrots for builders to simply transition to an all electric home. So what we're trying to do is provide a model for that. So Greenline's successfully sold over 35 homes that are currently occupied throughout Chicago. We have 11 homes under construction. You're going to be able to see one today at the open house. The single family homes range from 1,600 to 3,300 square foot. So these aren't tiny homes, they're large homes. 2-unit buildings have been successfully built at 2,400 square feet. And there'll be a picture of that later in my presentation. And there's a beta 3-unit building that we have under construction. Next slide, please. So, when you're speaking to consumers about electrification, oftentimes you hear sacrifice. I need my gas stove. I'm going to miss my gas stove, all this type of thing. You've got to get away from what you're giving up, and you got to really spell out this vision of just how wonderful it is to live in a home that is safer, has better indoor air quality, is quieter. It has a lot of advantages to build a green home and to build an all-electric home versus a gas-powered home that's built to code. So I always say that consumers, once they experience these homes, there's a huge competitive advantage. Being a person that lives in one, I look in the rearview mirror of living in a gas-powered home, and I don't worry about carbon monoxide detectors. I don't have any concerns about that now. Next slide, please. So this is a cutaway of your typical Greenline home. So it'll be in the slide deck here. You guys can refer to it. The red items talk a lot about the building envelope and the insulation. The orange items there talk about the systems that are the energy efficient systems that are there. The gray items refer to the appliance changes that'll happen in an all electric home. The beige items talk about the health benefits of living in some of these homes. The blue items refer to water efficiency, and the green items talk a lot about just material use efficiencies. So if you want to skip the next slide, please. Quiet and bright interiors. This is a huge selling point to consumers and a big competitive advantage. When you're in a home with triple pane glass, you can have bigger windows that let in more light. And if you have the same size windows, they just save more energy. More efficient doors are really kind of critical because doors are where you get a lot of air leaks. So you've got to pay attention to the type of door you're putting in. Next slide, please. Insulated foundations. This is a key advantage of new construction. If you're building a retrofit, it's very hard to insulate your foundation, but in new construction, it's very cost effective. What Greenline does is they simply add 4 inches of foam to the outside walls of the foundation and 2 inches of foam underneath the slab, and that causes a thermal break between the concrete and the ground, which certainly improves air quality by reducing risk of condensation against that foundation wall, so warm air hitting a cold concrete surface. And it also just saves energy and makes that basement more valuable space. Next slide, please. So the typical Green Line home has staggered stud framing, an 8-inch wall system with 2x4 vertical studs. We find that it doesn't use a lot more lumber, and it may actually save lumber. I'll let Benjamin speak to that down the road. But what's really advantageous about a frame building is that, one, we can clad it in a material that's maintenance free. Typically masonry buildings are going to need more maintenance because modern masonry materials just struggle in our climate a little bit with freeze and thaw. The other thing about the having a frame building is typically we're on a 25-foot lot. If you've got a 12-inch masonry wall on 2 sides and setback requirements, the interior of your home shrinks quite a bit by the time you insulate it. Whereas with a frame building, we can get a wider interior, which the consumer really wants. So I always say that it's a benefit to be frame in the city versus a liability when consumers ask why frame. There is a cost advantage. It obviously makes these homes more affordable, and the maintenance factor to me is the big one. Nobody wants to spend thousands of dollars every 5 to 10 years to seal the outside of their masonry building. Next slide, please. Engineered insulation. So, you pick insulation for the task you have, right? So blown in cellulose, dense packed cellulose, these are recycled component materials that do a very good job of breaking thermal conduction in the building. It's very inexpensive. And it's just a great way to insulate a building, but it doesn't work in every application. So sometimes you'll see in the second photo there's some flash foam that's been used in leak prone areas or against a masonry surface to prevent condensation on those areas. Next slide, please. Airtight. So, a lot of people wonder how you get a building airtight. Building wraps, in this case, there's blue skin, and effectively these building wraps stick on. There's not 1,000 staples holding them on, causing 1,000 holes in the envelope before you start, right? And these materials tend to stay on better during the construction process. So once the siding is on, they tend to be intact as opposed to, stapled on items that can blow off. You obviously get no leaks, no drafts, no pest, no outdoor air infiltration, which helps cut down on pollen. So allergy sufferers can benefit from that. Next slide, please. Beautifully durable. So I think that one of the key advantages of building a frame building is you get a little more flexibility in design. Cost is not as much of an issue because you can use materials like hardy board, for example, here that really add to the facade of the building. What we're looking at is a 2-unit building, which is very different than what a typical 2-flat looks like. Next slide, please. Heat pumps, Scott hit the nail on the head. There's huge advances in heat pumps. The one that's heating and cooling the house I'm in today goes down to -17. I woke up this morning and it was just fine inside my house, despite the fact that, nighttime temperatures are well below the capacity of normal heat pumps. The delivery systems, like Scott said, there's several ways to do it. In a new construction house, it just depends on who your audience is and price point to decide how you're going to deliver that heating and cooling to the building. Next slide, please. Breathing easy. So we feel that fresh air is a requirement inside a building. So having an ERV that is constantly swapping inside and outside air is really important. The particular ERV that we're using here also assists the bath fans and the kitchen fans in ventilation by allowing for better makeup air. So it'll speed up its intake and slow down its exhaust so that those fans work better. You can actually feel, trust me, when you step out of a shower in a house like this, you can feel the difference in how fast you draft. The humidity is more under control. That fresh air makes a big difference in the fan's ability to remove humidity from that bathroom. Next slide, please. Induction. I talk about induction as an experience. I think that electric cooking gets a bad rap, mainly from resistive heats cooktops, which burn your pancakes and burn your eggs and all this stuff. But induction cooking is a superior cooking experience to gas in every way. More control, it's faster, it's more efficient, it's easier to clean, it doesn't burn as easily, and you get benefit from not having any of the emissions related to a gas stove. And I'm also going to point out, just like Scott, that you still need a hood. because you're cooking stuff, there's food being cooked, and you still want to get those byproducts out of the building. But just by eliminating all that combustion, you've really done yourself a huge favor. Next slide, please. Domestic hot water is a hybrid hot water heater. It's a no-brainer. If you look at the energy guide label here, it's $104 a year to run this unit. That's significantly lower than the cost of even a high efficiency gas unit. They obviously eliminates any carbon monoxide hazards and just does a great job of keeping up with hot water demand. This particular unit can use a heat pump and resistors to heat your hot water, so it can keep up with high demand situations. Next slide, please. Solar PV, once you've done all this electrification, you can put solar on your roof and you can produce your own power, right? So this is an economic argument that effectively untethers the owner from carbon fuel prices related to their house. So if you're worried that fuel costs are going to continue to go up, which I believe is a reasonable worry to have in this world, this is a great way to defend against that by producing your own electricity to power your own life. What these systems do is they simply overproduce all summer, and then in the wintertime, they use ComEd's net metering program to draw down some of that banked power, that rollover power. In short, it's a win-win-win. So like the consumer gets a more affordable, safer, and durable home that needs less maintenance. The home builder gets a competitive advantage. Other home builders, once they see an all-electric home and experience it, they don't want the other house. And they can benefit from better margins, all these rebates and all these incentives. And the community gets a home that is better built, has a lower carbon footprint, and it's going to be there for generations, and it's resilient to energy cost fluctuations. So this is really truly a win for the city, the community, the people that own the home, and the home builder. And so once people start to understand that, I think this becomes something that gets adopted very quickly. Next speaker up, Grant Ulrich. Grant is the Managing Deputy Commissioner at the City of Chicago's Department of Buildings. He's going to talk a little bit about the Energy Transformation Code and some of the stuff Scott and I have touched on already at this point, but he'll go into a little more detail about electrification, how the City of Chicago looks at it. Grant,
thanks, Wayne.
Thank you.
And next slide. So I'm here today to talk about the Energy Transformation Code. I worked on it in cooperation with a lot of people, including some of the other panelists on this call. But before I start on the Energy Transformation Code, I want to point out that the Energy Transformation Code is really just one part of Mayor Lightfoot and the City of Chicago's ongoing commitment to address the climate crisis, and to do so with a focus on equity. There's been a lot of activity since the last Energy Code was adopted in 2019. And we know it's both very exciting, but also a lot to keep track of. Next slide. So the Department of Buildings is proud to play a major role in decarbonizing our buildings. That has been and will continue to be an important focus of our ongoing code modernization initiative. To be successful in that, we work with all sorts of outside groups, and that's critical. Our partnerships with the people who are out there designing and building buildings is how we get things done. So thank you to Illinois Green Alliance for hosting today's event. Next slide. Since this is titled Home Economics, we'll just start with some sort of data-y slides. Scott covered a lot of data, but just in terms of the model energy codes in the 20 years that Chicago has been adopting an energy code as part of our construction codes, the efficiency of residential buildings, it's I believe 36% more efficient. So just that baseline building has improved a lot from industry work towards improving the way we build our buildings. Commercial buildings are even better. Next slide. And I think we have to sort of take into account these changes. Again, there are all the sort of federal incentives and things from the Inflation Reduction Act, but there's also some underlying economic choices about where we get our energy in the Chicago area. So this is data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that, well, historically, Chicago electric prices were a little bit above national electric prices. That has been coming down, and actually by November of last year, the last month they have data reported for, it actually changed. So Chicago electricity is cheaper per kilowatt hour than the national average. And on the other side, historically, Chicago gas per therm was less expensive. But again, that too, by November had come, well, but by May had switched. November, it was back down, but right at around that national average. So that sort of price difference of gas versus electric versus the national environment has really changed recently in Chicago. So that's an underlying factor that the city council took into account in developing this policy change. Next slide. And the Chicago Energy Transformation Code is an integrated part of the Chicago construction codes, and with the Chicago zoning ordinance helps to set our standards for both existing buildings and new construction going forward. Next slide. The energy code is broken into two parts, just like the model code that we base it on. The residential portion, which deals with non-transient residential buildings up to 4 stories, and then the commercial portion, which really deals with everything else. Today, because today's call is called Home Economics, today's webinar will really focus on the residential side of the code. Next slide. And just to highlight the organization of the code, again, there's the commercial part and the residential part, and each is broken into 7 chapters. The core requirements are really in chapter 4 of each part. Some modified requirements for existing buildings in chapter 5 of each part. And then as part of the Energy and Transformation Code, we have some special Chicago specific requirements in chapter 6. Next slide. So one question I get a lot is, why is this being called the Energy Transformation Code instead of the Energy Conservation Code like before? The answer is that this is really about more than reducing energy usage, although that's an important first step. It's about continuing to transition to a clean energy future with preparations for future electrification that you've already heard a little bit about and we'll talk more about, and solar installation in new buildings, which will be, and we recognize that the buildings being built today are going to be part of Chicago's building stock for decades and decades. So next slide. So again, the baseline is still about energy conservation, energy savings, making building envelopes more efficient. So the walls, window, roof, foundation, the systems inside those buildings, the lighting, the heating, the cooling, making those more efficient. And then an additional Chicago requirement that we borrowed from New York, making sure that things that penetrate that building envelope are also not sort of weak points in the sweater that you're wrapping around your building to keep everyone warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Next slide. So the residential provisions, again, have changed in the model code, and we adopt that model code as our baseline. So we'll talk about those in a little bit of detail. Next slide. In terms of the building envelope, so again, some of the requirements have changed. Some of them are still the same from the last energy code that was adopted 3 years ago. But the requirements for insulating walls and roofs in wood frame buildings have gotten a little bit tighter, again, recognizing that there's a sort of industry capacity to do that again, but it is an evolving requirement. And these requirements took effect for permit applications that started November 1st, 2022. Similarly, some requirements around window solar heat gain coefficient. Next slide. And then again, I mentioned in looking at the model energy code and seeing if there were differences or things that we need to do here, we looked to New York City, who in at least their last version, but I think maybe the last 2 versions, has had these extra requirements about dealing with thermal breaks at where there are penetrations of that exterior envelope, either by parapet walls or balconies projecting out through that building. So we've adopted those same requirements for us here in Chicago. So when figuring out how to comply with them, we can certainly learn from the guidance that New York City has worked on putting out. Next slide. And as noted, building systems are getting more efficient, and the minimums in the code ramp up with every addition. So both making sure the systems are more efficient and having some additional obligations on the builder during construction to verify that those systems are being built as they're designed and performing as designed. Next slide. And then with electricity, the change in this code, the last code required 90% of lighting in residential to be high efficacy, so usually LED. Now it's all of the permanent lighting. There's some exceptions for lighting that's part of appliances, but even that generally is able to be high efficacy lighting these days. And then there's some requirements around having dimmers and occupant sensors in most rooms in residential. So that's new with this code, again, about sort of reducing that baseline energy usage. Next slide. And that's where we get to the energy transformation pieces. So again, first preparing for a clean energy transition. So electrification ready residences. We've already heard a lot about that. I'll cover it a little bit more. The other thing, we banned new decorative gas lighting. So sorry to Old Town and Lincoln Park and some areas where they like that aesthetically. There's some other choices though to maybe get that look. The other thing to keep in mind, Chicago City Council adopted in 2020 some requirements for having new parking spaces be ready for electric vehicles, EVSE being electric vehicle supply equipment ready. So building on some of those requirements. Next slide. And as to reinforce what you've already heard, if you are building new construction or you are doing a change of use conversion, so taking a warehouse and making it into residential, you are going to have to be electrification ready if you choose to still have gas appliances. So this code is not banning gas appliances, but it is requiring that the wiring and the electrical capacity built at the time of construction or conversion for individual water heating equipment, individual indoor cooking appliances, and individual clothes dryers. With the water heaters, there's also a requirement for some additional space because heat pump water heating equipment needs a little bit of space to that's different than the clearances required for a gas-fired water heater. So those are the design requirements. If you choose to put in both, you can, of course, choose to go all electric. And I encourage everyone to go out to the home tour this afternoon if you signed up for that to see what that looks like. Next slide. And then again, no more natural gas lighting. That's not fireplaces or anything like that yet. It is about decorative gas lighting. Next slide. And then again, the electric vehicle ready ordinance is still in effect. That's part of the zoning ordinance. But again, if you are building new multifamily or commercial, you are required to have conduit and electrical capacity to have those spaces be ready for electric vehicle supply equipment, or you can choose to install it upfront. And there's some incentives around that may have changed the calculus from even when that was adopted just 2-ish years ago. Next slide. And then another piece of the energy transformation code that doesn't really affect small residential buildings is a requirement for solar ready roofs. And we're doing some other things around solar. So next slide. For buildings that have a ground level footprint greater than 7,500 square feet, there is a requirement that 40% of the available roof area, so not taken up by equipment or occupied roof, green roof, be structurally reinforced for the installation of solar panels, that there's space in the electrical panel to interconnect those solar panels, and some amount of floor space in the building for a battery. Next slide. So using the crystal ball here and knowing some things that are in the works in the plan, but all things change. So this summer, we're excited that we're going to be rolling out some updates to our what we call easy permitting today. We're rebranding that express permits. We're going to have a new online interface for those, including for our solar express permits. So up to 13.4 kilowatt hours, I believe, is the capacity. So smaller installations with some limitations. We're going to move that process that's Solar Express today to an even easier to use online process. So we're excited about that this summer. And then in the next 2 years, we'll be working on our electrical code, and the fire department continues to work on the fire prevention code to make sure that our codes are up to date in terms of what those standards are for energy storage systems and solar installations up to the latest national standards. So next slide. The other thing that we do in the energy code, again, the energy code is a baseline. These are minimum requirements that everyone has to meet, but we recognize that there are certainly people, and probably many of you on this call, who want to go above and beyond, and we don't want to be a barrier to that. So in setting the baseline energy code, we recognize 2 national certification programs as alternatives to complying with most pieces of the energy code. So either the National Green Building Standard at the gold or the emerald level. So that's a certification program that's been developed by a number of national groups. And then the FIAS certification program. Both of those involve sort of submitting your design to a third party before you build and doing some verification after you build to confirm that it's built to those standards. Both of those we've determined are above and beyond the baseline of our energy code. So if you choose to participate in either of those programs, you can ignore many of the sort of prescriptive requirements of the energy code. Next slide. And then recognizing that much of the work that happens in Chicago is work in existing buildings. We did work to make sure that the existing building provisions of the energy code were clearer in some ways that were confusing, and also had some Chicago specific provisions carried forward about re-roofing, low sloped roofs, and insulating masonry walls and load-bearing masonry walls in older buildings. So we have some Chicago specific things, recognizing that we also want to encourage reuse of our existing building stock. Next slide. And to help people comply, we've made resources available at chicago.gov/energy code. So we have some summaries of the different compliance methods. Sometimes I say the energy code is the choose your own adventure code because it has so many ways that you can comply with it, which gets a little confusing, but we did try and spell out for each of those methods that you can choose what we expect to see uploaded to project docs, and then also some of the certification verification requirements that are required during the construction phase. Next slide. And then again, in addition to chicago.gov/energy code, there are great resources out there from the Smart Energy Design Assistance Center, or CDAC, at the University of Illinois, and also the U.S. Department of Energy. So I'd encourage you to look into those, and we have links to those again at chicago.gov/energy code. So thank you very much. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Sophia now to talk about some of those incentives that are out there to help you do this financially.
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. Next slide, please. I know we covered all the options for electric homes and the code, so I'll now cover how to maximize the financial incentive through the ComEd Electric Homes program. Next slide, please. So Electric Homes new construction offering was a pilot beginning in 2020. Our program started with a dozen of high performance electric homes in Chicago, Northern Illinois, and increased the all electric homes since then. Geographically, you can also see on the map that it has expanded from Chicago downtown area to Marengo and Estill. So lots of more suburban neighborhoods as well. And on the map, the green dots are showing the completed projects, and the blue dots are actually showing the projects in the pipeline that are completing in 2023. So as it turned a full-fledged official program in 2022, we are excited to see more growth for the next few years. For the dwelling types, we have this previous slide, please. We have awesome projects here, both including new construction and major renovation. I do get a lot of questions that if this program accept the major renovation. So we do accept major renovation. So I wanted to just point that out on that. And also we started to accept the salary dwelling units and small multifamily projects as well. The small multifamily projects are defined as still meeting the residential building code, but they're up to 4 stories within the city of Chicago. And if it's outside of city of Chicago, it would be up to 3 stories. Next, please. One of the major reasons for the past few years that I've heard from the builders and homeowners is that really ensuring the superior quality and comfort of a home is a major reason that they're going all electric. I have been even reaching out to the homeowners after severe winter that we had last Christmas. Days of blizzard, and they were pretty satisfied with the tighter envelope and then with the heat pump performance. With that tighter envelope, another benefit is minimizing the HVAC equipment size and cost, which will eventually reduce the total energy, home energy use. By going all electric, you don't really have to think about the monthly gas line fees and coordination, which costs about $20 to $50 per month. And without gas, that adds another benefit of healthy indoor air quality and no gas combustion, like what we mentioned. For builders like Greenline Homes, they can future-proof their business and upsell by bundling solar, EV-ready options, and also smart home features. I'm sure Benjamin will share more of that experience. Next, please. So what do I need to meet in order to participate in the program? So the blue are showing the minimum requirement of the program. It starts with the high quality, airtight and well insulated envelope. The heat pump space heating on the bottom right, and there is a heat pump water heater as well to the next. You really have to think about like the holistic view of energy efficient all electric homes. The appliances include the refrigerator, dishwasher, and clothes washer and dryer should be Energy Star certified. And the project should also have the LED lights, which is pretty easy to achieve, and also low flow faucets and smart thermostats for the compatible HVAC system, and ensure that the indoor air quality and copper requirements are met as well. The orange colored ones, the solar, EV charger, induction cooktop are highly recommended, but those are not part of the requirement of the program. And the small multifamily projects, we do have additional requirements that are for common area and parking garage, if applicable, but the main requirements are still the same. Next, please. The exciting news is that we have increased incentives for 2023. So the incentive is provided per unit. As you can see on the table here, we have 3 different incentive tiers depending on the project sizes. So let's say you have 2 flat projects that are 1,000 square feet each, then you will get the $4,000 per each unit. So that's $8,000 total for that project. And we also provide the Radar incentive, which is $200 per unit as well, that they will help us fill out the Radar workbook when the project is completed. Next, please. This is showing like a step-by-step for easier program participation. So if your projects will meet the program requirement and are in the design phase, that is the perfect time to submit the application and participate in the program. That way, it is easier to incorporate the program requirements that we talked about. And also, after you selected all the equipment, then you will submit the specification spreadsheet, which is making sure you are meeting the program requirements early on. I would also like to highlight the next step, which is very important to meet the program envelope airtightness requirements. If you are kind of new to building all electric homes or haven't done the below door task before, make sure you reach out to the Radar early so that they can help you with the air tightness strategies. Then while designing the building your home by meeting the program requirement, we also highlight the ways to increase the resiliency of a home: solar, EV charger, induction cooktop for healthier, safer home. If you want to see and feel how they looks like overall, please come to our all electric homes tour happening this afternoon at 4 p.m. And when the project is completed, you will do the blower door test with the Radar to finalize the air tightness of a home. And also, I want to note that if you're really unsure who to reach out to for the Radar, or you're new to heat pump technology, then we are also happy to share some of the resources, including a handful of home energy radars and manufacturers as well for easier program participation and education. So please reach out to me if you have any questions on that. And after the blower door test and everything is met, you will receive the incentive via check. That is my last slide. So I think we are almost time here, but I will now hand it off to Benjamin.
Hi there. So we're at an interesting inflection point. I will spin through these slides and get to the end quickly, but for the there we go. Been in business since '99, and I'm going to just spin through these. Since 2015, we have been building all electric homes, solar powered homes. primarily on the south side of Chicago. And for quite a while, we've spent a little bit more money than average for a home builder. And with the idea and the proven result that we have developed a niche market, and we've had really good sales and we've been pretty successful. I thought that we would develop quite a bit of competition at this point, people following suit, doing the same thing, but it hasn't happened as I thought it would. A few people are building like this, but not enough. But now the inflection point has led us to where the money actually makes sense. I'm gonna flip to, here we go. Let's see if I can pause that. Can everybody see these numbers? So to build an all-electric home, in my estimation, is going to cost you about $7,000 more the way we do it. And there are now, just with a couple incentives, the ComEd incentive, which can be more if it's a 2-flat, and I have that more for 2-flat in the wrong spot. Department of Energy Zero Energy Home Rating incentive is now $5,000, and so you can actually, there's a financial incentive to build these homes now, so there's no excuse anymore, and everybody should be doing this. So reach out to me. You'd be surprised how few people do after something like this. And there's another example of the cost. These are just the costs to me. I'm not sure what the alternative cost these days, but that's what I pay for a water heater, induction stove, and heat pump dryer. And here are some resources that I recommend, and I think we should move to a Q&A.
That's great. That's great. And that slide, I think the most screenshot slide in this presentation is going to be Ben's cost analysis there. There's a couple questions out here I highlighted that I want to make sure we bring to the general audience. And for those of you who have to go, thanks for coming. Hopefully we'll see you at the open house. So if you guys want to stick around, we're going to do this Q&A and stay as long as you'd like to hear any of your questions answered. So we got a question: having lived in and having had to break a lease and leave a home with mold contamination, can you all explain the advantages and dangers of airtight homes, especially ventilation material choices? If your carpet is exhaling chemicals, you don't want to lock them in. I'll toss this one to Benjamin since you've had less screen time.
The answer is mechanical ventilation. The rule of thumb is to seal it tight, ventilate right. I may have gotten that a little bit wrong, but the building science consensus now is that the little bit of energy penalty that you'll have from running an energy recovery ventilator is worth it. You want to make the house as tight as possible and then bring in mechanical air that ideally is also filtered. So you're going to end up with better quality indoor air, much better quality than even outdoor air or typical indoor. Typical indoor air is very bad, and we spend 90% of our time as Americans indoors, unfortunately.
Great answer. Anybody want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump in. So Wayne had a slide about energy recovery ventilators, which goes to what Benjamin was speaking to. It's crucial that these things operate continuously. We're not just putting in fresh air intermittently. It brings in fresh air constant, and it extracts old stale air constantly as well. So you're continuously changing over the air inside your home. I just installed one in our home, and it costs per my energy monitoring about 50 cents a day to operate continuously. And our CO2 levels and all these, indoor air quality contaminants have reduced dramatically, which would possibly include mold as well. And it's just, I can't say more how important it is to do that.
Yeah, Scott, I saw you post on LinkedIn, like the air quality, the CO2 levels in your bedrooms overnight had changed quite a bit when you had that ERV installed. So that's,
Substantially, yeah.
and CO2 levels, if anybody's wondering, they're an indicator of how fresh the air is, right? So if you have high CO2 levels, there's not a lot of air exchange with the outside, but if it's closer to atmosphere, that means you've got a lot of fresh air. The other thing I'll add to that is condensation is also a cause of a lot of mold issues. There's air leaks and, you know, concrete that like warm air hits in a basement and this type of thing. So you really just have to pay attention to where your condensation problems are to prevent mold as well. And so that's just, you know, one more thing to add out there for the builders out there. If a Chicago homeowner is interested in electric retrofit and or green new construction, where do they start? How can they ensure they're capturing all the possible tax incentives? So Sophia, I'm going to let you.
Yeah. So definitely, we do accept the major renovation projects, retrofits. So please reach out to me to learn about the details and the best practices. As I mentioned, I'm happy to share some of the resources. That's what I do, trying to share the resources and the educational, links and things like that. So please reach out to me. And also, there is for the homeowners from the IRA, there is the tax credit that is offered. I think for the heat pump itself, I think it's up to 30% and up to $2,000 per year. I'm also happy to talk with you on that, but the tax incentive, you probably have to talk with the tax experts. But for the program purposes, I'm happy to share all the information that I know.
Yeah, and I know the programs committee's got their eyes on trying to find a resource for like navigating the Inflation Reduction Act. So
there is rewiringamerica.org, which seems to have a pretty good website for that right now.
Perfect. So if you guys are looking to capitalize on making sure you can economically capitalize on this, you gotta do some homework, but it's worth doing, you know. So this one, Grant, this is probably more for you, and Benjamin, you might want to take a shot at this question too. If we are a developer, how do we get information on a building an all-electric home? Are there drawing sets available for sale? How do they get this information to an architect we already are working with? So I think this is going to be a common question that builders have because they have their relationships with their architects. They have the people that they work with, and they feel like maybe this is an uphill climb for them.
Yeah, so we did a program about a month ago with Illinois Green and with AIA Chicago that was more focused on the design professional audience. There's a recording of that on our website, and I think probably on Illinois Green's website. Also, you know, we have resources that are, again, we target our resources towards those professionals who are helping people comply at chicago.gov/energy code to sort of try and summarize some of those baseline requirements. So if you have an architect or an engineer that you're working with now, again, definitely point them in that direction to make sure you aren't going to run into problems with permitting or inspections.
Another great question here that came up is, and Benjamin, I don't know if you want to add to what Grant.
You can certainly reach out to me, come to the tour this afternoon. On that list of costs, I included $375 for a manual J&D. And you can also talk to energy raters. Those are really good starting resources, people who are going to be experienced with someone who's just starting out in this.
Benjamin, shouldn't you have a manual JD regardless of heat
I
pump or
put
not?
it in there because in reality, a lot of people don't, or they kind of fudge it. So yeah, at least at the smaller single family home.
I'm going to translate for some folks that maybe don't know what the manual JOD is. Basically making sure your duct work and your placement of your ducts and all this fit the load capacity of that room during the coldest day and hottest day, you know, for your heating and cooling. And there's, you know, simple engineering calculations somebody could do to make sure the system's designed correctly. And I live in a home with that. It is the exact same temperature almost throughout my entire house. It's fantastic.
I want to add one quick thing. We have like a ComEd Air Source heat pump training program. So if you're new to heat pump technology or you haven't tried the manual J or anything calculation like that, I'm also happy to share the resources on that specifically.
Yeah, and those of you who are asking retrofit questions, I think that it's important to understand that, you know, maybe this manual J or D is not as much of an option, but there's also these other delivery mechanisms for heating and cooling, like the high wall mounted split systems and things like that, that can, if you properly size them and you insulate and you weather seal first before you buy your equipment, you're probably doing yourself a big economic favor. There's so another question. So a ducted kitchen exhaust is required whether we select gas or electric cooking appliances. Understood on the operable window. It's a typical condition, light and vent requirement in dwelling units. So I'm going to toss this one to Grant and then Scott, because I think you guys probably have two. There's a code opinion and then there's the engineer's concept here. Oh, Grant, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I mean, so we clarified some of the requirements around when you are using mechanical ventilation to meet this requirement in the energy transformation code with a little amendment to the mechanical code. Again, if you have a window in that kitchen, you can use natural ventilation still in Chicago to meet it. Again, that's not usually available with lots of these designs. So again, if you aren't providing natural ventilation on operable window, you do have to provide mechanical ventilation, and we updated those standards to sort of the latest guidance and national model codes.
Yeah, and so that's the code requirement, is you have to have at least a window. And then Scott, what are your thoughts on that question?
Best practice would be to still have mechanical ventilation and exhaust, because as you know, today, you don't necessarily want to open your window to ventilate your kitchen when you're cooking. It really will impact the comfort in that space and also results in a pretty large energy penalty as you bring in new unconditioned outdoor air into your kitchen. It mixes with the other air and then has to be heated to whatever your set point is. So it could be done more effectively, not just in terms of energy, but in terms of indoor air quality and health and wellness, if you kind of plan for it ahead of time.
I think one of the concerns is, a lot of the stuff in the media is about the pollutants from combustion and a gas stove. And Scott, can you kind of speak to maybe why you should still have a ducted hood even though you're using electric only?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think from our perspective, you have two options. You could do a hood ducted directly above the gas or electric range, or you can use a general kitchen exhaust, which isn't at the cooking source. It's more kind of off to the back, but still providing continuous exhaust. And if you do that, it's recommended you have a recirculation hood above the range that can do minimal filtration, a MERV 13 or a washable mesh filter. It's really, you're trying to manage the pollutants that comes from cooking, which happens regardless of gas or electric. When you cook food, if you're using oil, if you're searing, food material, that releases small particulates that need to be managed regardless of gas or electric, which is why you need some sort of ventilation and exhaust system.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you would need that recirculating hood as a minimum if you're using the window as your exhaust option, a ventilation option as well. So the sort of minimum is a recirculating hood over a cooking appliance, whether it's gas or electric, to deal with some of those other products, the grease and things that are put off when you're cooking. The exhaust can be met in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that just best practice is, if you want to make yourself code proof for the next 50 years, right, you're going to install a ducted kitchen ventilation system, because at some point code will have to catch up with the science around air quality, and it's imminent. Supply chain issues. Benjamin, maybe you can speak to this. Have there been supply chain issues around heat pumps and some of this other stuff that you're having to incorporate in these houses versus the gas HVAC equipment?
Yes, we have to plan to buy them early, but I think we've also been requested to make one of these the last question, and we'll do the rest in the resource document. So yeah, I don't expect those issues to persist. All the manufacturers know that there's going to be a huge demand and they're ramping up production.
And then this is, and I'm going to see if maybe Grant has a potential resource here, but we have a question on, is this program something that homeowners can apply for financial help with retrofitting an existing single family home? Do we know if there's any conversation around helping homeowners retrofit or like advisory or resource? I know we got the Inflation Reduction Act, we got these incentives, but I think navigating that for some people is a little challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the city, through other departments than buildings, through planning and development and housing, are working on some income qualified programs that I think are not fully rolled out yet. I think I'll pass this to Sophia to talk about maybe some of the utility run incentive programs that are already up and running.
For the rebate program, specifically for the single like appliances or heat pump, we do have the rebates going on, but the electric homes program, we are having that holistic view, and of course we would be happy to help you out with the retrofits projects too.
And I don't think we've asked this yet, but I think it's a great question, is have the trades caught up or catching up with these new technologies? Is easy to find people who can install, maintain, or repair heat pumps in Chicago? I think Benjamin maybe.
We've had a little bit of a challenge, but the good thing is there's not much that goes wrong with them. But getting like service providers who are, completely up to speed with Mitsubishi, particularly to the south side, has been a challenge for us, but we've solved it. But it's a huge opportunity. I think we need to wrap up.
I'm going to turn it over to Maggie.
Thank you all for hanging on for a few extra minutes to answer some of those questions. We have a lot of questions in our Q&A, so we'll be putting those into a document that we'll send out next week with the recording and PDFs of the slides. I want to thank Scott, Grant, Benjamin, Wayne, and Sophia for sharing their expertise and time today on today's program. And I hope to see you all next week at our annual meeting. It's this in-person event from 4 to 6 p.m. at Perkins & Will. I just put the link in the chat. This is a great opportunity to learn more about how to get involved with Illinois Green and meet other members like the panelists who will just to kind of talk shop about green buildings. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you at the next program.
And at the open house tonight.
And at the open house,
Yes.
from 4 to 6 p.m. If you registered for that, the address is in your email. We'll do rolling tours throughout the evening. So come at any time between 4 and 6. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye.